God has a purpose for our life bigger than what we understand, and sometimes He will allow us to walk through difficulty, pain, or even loss to show His power and His redemption and restoration in our life. So sometimes He will even sacrifice our comfort for the sake of the character He wants to build in us. Recently, at Vertical, Mary Lynch shared her story of that truth, of how God used a very difficult time in her life to develop something deeper within her. So today, we're going to take a deeper dive into that story. Her husband James is joining us. We'll get his perspective as well. So I appreciate you joining with us today. Feel free to like and subscribe and share this story today. So Mary told her story in a service that you can go back and find on our YouTube channel called Trust Issues. And in that, Mary told her story of being diagnosed with cancer and then how God worked in her to heal that cancer, but more importantly, heal something else. And this is where we're taking the deeper dive today. So Mary, just to help us have perspective and context today, take us back to what happened, this little scenario of a couple of years, I guess it was, where, or a year and a half maybe, where God walked you through this process. So start with diagnosis of cancer and walk us through just overview quickly of your story.
Okay. So December of 2021, I went in for a routine mammogram. And so within a couple of days, they called me back and, said that there was a suspicious area that they wanted to do some more testing on. So within a few days, I went back in and through that particular, battery of tests, they decided that they needed to do an ultrasound. And then they decided that I needed to have a biopsy at that point. Mm-hmm. So after the biopsy, that was December 20th, I got a call back on December 27th saying that it was malignant. I was told that it was a rare form, the rarer form of breast cancer. It's lobular carcinoma, which only affects about 5% of women compared to ductal carcinoma. So, I was obviously...
Yeah, this is right around Christmas.
This is right around Christmas. So, of course, I'd ask them, please don't call and give me any results until I can get through Christmas, at least with my family. And so they honored that. And so this was December 27th that they called to tell me this news.
Right.
Of course, for me, it was just, it was a big shock. Breast cancer does not run in the family. I really just, was just very much taken off guard.
Right.
So then once they, gave me the diagnosis, I started to immediately start looking for treatment options, and just kind of filtering through all of that, getting his opinion on kind of where to go from there. Mm-hmm.
So you come upon a treatment plan, and that's non-traditional.
Yes.
And that takes you forward in time to a different set of circumstances that actually is where God is going to do a great work in you.
Yes.
So give us an overview of what that treatment plan looked like. Well,
because of another family member that had been diagnosed with cancer about 5 years prior, I mention this because it's important, because I know this journey that I was on was went way far back than just where it started with me going in for a mammogram.
Right.
There was many things that God set up for me along the way that, of course, at that time I had no idea, but I started looking into integrative medicine.
Okay.
People ask what that is, and it's basically just the concept of balancing science with nature.
Okay.
To do less harm to the body through the process of getting rid of the cancer. So what through that process and just the knowledge that I had gained five years prior, and then a little bit even along the way, the algorithm, that I was seeing on my, Twitter or, any kind of media like that, started to become more educational towards that way of healing cancer.
Right.
So, anyway, through my research and, just talking with James about what I wanted to do, what I felt like the direction I should go was, there were a few places here in the Metroplex that did integrative medicine. And then there was a place in Mesa, Arizona that also provided a little bit more of an extensive style recovery and treatment.
Okay.
So, of course, I didn't want to leave my family.
Yeah.
I didn't, this is a big step.
Right.
You're picking up everything that you know, you're walking away from everything that you know, everything that you're comfortable with, your family, and moving away to states, and going to be bunkering down for, a good 6-7 weeks.
Yeah.
So
and any treatment plan is difficult to
Absolutely,
walk through for cancer. This one for you, like you said, is going to take you out of your comfort and out of a controlled environment that you like.
Yes, because there, like I said,
would.
there were places in the Metroplex I could have went to, but I mean, again, I know now that God didn't give me any. I didn't feel settled. I didn't feel any peace. It was just unsettling in my spirit, and that to go to any of these places in the Metroplex, I didn't feel peace about that. I kept being drawn towards this place in Mesa, and so then we made the final decision to head that way.
Okay, so spoiler alert: she goes. They both go, and they go through the treatment process, and they come away at the end with a report of you're clear of cancer.
Yes.
So that's a powerful story in of itself. But where we do a little bit deeper dive today is in what you described in your story as God was healing a different cancer in me.
Yes.
Something in my spirit and my own soul. Now, you mentioned in that when you shared your story that part of this was a process of releasing control, of letting go of a grip on life. And you mentioned that there was even some events that happened earlier in your life that caused you to come to that place of where you felt like, I need to take control. I think everybody can relate to that there are events in our life where they're painful, they're difficult, and we want to not go through that again. So we sometimes will grab a hold of life and say, I'm not going to let this happen again. I will take control. So to help us with context here, because again, this is where the healing really occurs for you, the deeper healing. Help us understand a little bit more about what were some of those things that happened that caused you to say, I will take control of my life. I will run this ship. What were some of those events?
Well, it kind of started just from a little, being a child, living at home. I was in an environment that was just very unstable, in many ways and for many reasons. My father was he had a problem with alcohol for a time in my life. There was just a lot of volatile moments in our home. And he owned, what he did was his livelihood, he managed restaurants. And so he was out of town a lot.
Okay.
He wasn't very present in the home, but when he was, it could be a little tricky with, there was some physical abuse. There was not to me. There was just a lot of things that went on that caused me to feel extremely nervous as a child, insecure.
And you're not an only child.
I'm not. No,
Yeah.
I actually have 8 siblings.
Wow.
But a lot of them, I'm the baby, and I came along way later in life for my
Okay.
mother. So most of them had already gotten married, or when a couple of them went to the military. So there were only, at my earliest memory, is probably 4 or 5 years old. And really, I only had 2 siblings that were around at that time. The others had already kind of walked off into their lives. And so, but yeah, there was just a lot of stuff going on where alcohol was concerned, even some, drug use. And so it was very just unsettling for me as a child to witness those things. And so what came about was, as a little girl and then getting up into my teen years for sure, it became a feeling of, the bottom would always drop out. Something was always going to happen to cause turmoil. And so for me, I went to not cowering down as much as, okay, I'm going to try to just control everything around me that I possibly can.
Yeah.
Because again, there was so much that I couldn't control. So it just kind of stirred up in me this just, anxiety and all kind of feelings of just trying to control my environment.
Yeah. So you mentioned this idea that for you kind of developed this mindset of, okay, well, always something bad is going to happen.
Yeah.
The shoe's going to drop, the bottom's going to fall out, something terrible is going to happen. So that begins to kind of be your perspective on life. If there's anything good that happens, there's going to be something negative that follows, right?
Yeah,
is that kind
pretty much, and that's kind of the way it did. Through like I said, with all of that going on with my father, when I was a teenager later, 16, 17, I found out about, my mother and I found out about some other children and families that he had,
Wow.
because eventually my father ended up owning these restaurants. So he actually moved to Oklahoma. So he wasn't at that point living in the house really at all. I think he would come home like once a month or something like that to visit, but otherwise, he wasn't really present. And so, all of these other things were going on the side. And then, just to kind of go off of what you were just saying, when I was 22, well, actually I was 20, my mother was diagnosed with brain cancer. Her and I had a very, very close, relationship, and she passed away when I was 22.
Wow.
Just to, fast forward, that was in 97. In 99, my brother was tragically killed. And I've lost 4 siblings.
Wow.
Since 97, from just tragic events.
Yeah.
So
this begins to be a way that you kind of process through life, that something bad is going to happen, and therefore I am going to control my environment as much as I can.
Which is crazy, right? Because what was I controlling?
Wasn't working for you.
All these things were happening. It's just this false sense.
Yeah, right.
Of just, keep it together, like you were just waiting. I was just waiting for the next bad thing to happen. So my guard's always up. I'm always tense. I'm always tight. I'm always in just complete and total turmoil, which came out in my relationships.
So you watch, I'm sure this begins to play out into your teen years, early 20s and stuff.
Oh, yes.
What are some ways that you see that happening through those years?
Just, just keeping people arm's length apart, away, I should say. Especially so, I meet James when I'm, almost 17. And so, through even the process of dating and engagement and marriage, that is really where it played out the most. And I jumped to that because yes, it did affect my preteen and early teen years, but or mid-teen years, but that was just in really guarding my heart away from people and allowing myself to really trust or to just be 100% personable.
Yeah.
You know, it just I always just was kind of looking for that next bad thing to happen. And it kind of just played out that way for sure.
Now it doesn't bring you to a place where you isolate and stay away from people, because you're out, you go to church, you're doing things, but throughout this process, from what you're describing, it's more of I'm guarded, I'm protective of everything. I'm kind of walls up, and I'm not gonna. I don't want anyone to see the depth of what's going on inside, and I'm protecting myself.
Yeah, because I mean, I was definitely considered an extrovert.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you know, there was for sure that aspect of myself. But see, I think that even just with a lot of people for a lot of different reasons, what you see on the outside is not what's going on the inside.
Yeah, exactly.
And so for me, it was like, oh, sure, I was considered friendly and caring and all these different things. And those things weren't necessarily not genuine. It's just that on the inside, I was like, what's the agenda? Or, you know, it was just never a point of being able to just enjoy life or enjoy any aspect of anything. And it wasn't because necessarily that other people were doing wrong towards me.
Right.
It was just because it was just a habit.
Yeah.
It just became this like ingrained thing in me to just be a ball of tightness all the time.
Wow. Does it even make you get to the place where you have this suspicion of everybody's motives? And,
yes. Oh, yeah.
And kind of a we'll get to you, James. It's coming. It's coming. So suspicious, but then maybe even already concluding in your mind that their motives are bad.
Yeah, you know, I will admit, and you know, I still struggle, you know, with this. Not near as much, especially in the last couple of years. God has really healed so much in me that I know where to put that now. I know where to go. I know what to say to myself. But, you know, it was kind of like, I don't know. I just overthought everything.
Yeah.
To exhaustion. What did that person mean when they said that? What is their true motive? What, you know, did I, and I always, oh gosh, just like, what do they mean by that?
Yeah.
You know, did I, or, you know, playing in my head, did I say something wrong? Or, I mean, it was so exhausting just to sit there and replay every conversation you ever had with anyone and wonder what their motive was.
Wow.
And, you know, it's just like, I really never could just relax and just, you know, enjoy relationships, because I'm always overthinking.
Yeah.
And I would even go to him and say, remember when this person said that? What do you think he or she meant by that? And he's like, I don't think they meant anything. I think they just meant what they said. So anyway, it was just scenarios like that.
All right, let's bring James into the conversation, because James, you meet Mary when she's young, and you date, and you fall in love with her to the point that you obviously get married and still together. So do you see some of this playing out in her life as a young teen and the one you're dating and falling in love with?
Yeah, so I was 18, so I was still very young and immature, and you know, through our dating years, I just saw it as she was really feisty. You know, we fought a lot, you know, and even to the point that a lot of our friends were wondering why we were getting married, because all we ever did was fight and argue, and but you know, we worked through all of that, and you know, it really didn't show up to me where it was clearly recognizable until, gosh, the first 4 years of our marriage were pretty volatile and chaotic, very volatile and chaotic.
Okay.
A lot of emotional, passionate fighting, just arguing, yelling. Just ridiculous. You know? I mean, a lot of young couples go through that. But ours was on another level.
Okay.
It was another level.
Yeah. And not to put it all on Mary again.
No, just about 90% of it. No, I'm just kidding. No, you know, she would, as she would say, her mind would go places, and it would end up in a fight, and I was, again, too young and immature to recognize what it was and did not respond properly, and that just escalated things exponentially. And so, not understanding fully yet what she's been through, the pain and the heartache, the things that she couldn't control, all the negativity in her life up to that point.
Yeah.
I really wanted to be the one that brought her out of that.
Yeah. Sure.
That was a mistake to think that way, but the intentions were good.
Yeah. You want to be the rescuer, and
yeah, sure. Who doesn't?
Yeah.
And ends up, I just ultimately needed to get out of the way. But I will say this: even though being young and immature, God still spoke to me. Back there, 19 or 20, 21, 22 years old. In the first, we got married at 20 and 18. So, he always just, and I never knew why or anything, but he just kept telling me patience, just wait. So I just, as hard as it was to go through that with somebody that you love, and just being lost and bewildered and blindsided and, just having that word, just to wait.
Yeah.
This is all going to be worth it.
Yeah.
That's hard because you don't have a time frame. You don't. Well, when?
Sure.
You just have to make a decision, largely based on the word that you're receiving from God. Is if you say wait, I'm just going to wait.
Yeah.
And try. I mean, you try to understand. You try to respond better. You try to de-escalate.
Right.
But gosh, it's so hard not to get offended and then respond in kind.
Yeah. So Mary, you remember those years, I guess.
I do.
And they were difficult.
They were. And I mean, I walked through that time just kind of with this preemptive strike on everything. I mean, like with him, it was just like I loved him.
Yeah.
I knew that he loved me. He'd have had to. But I just always questioned his motive. I was in this place where you're not going to control me. I'm going to let I'm going to put all that out there right now where you know that if you walk out of line based on what I was used to in my own bringing up.
Yep.
If you walk out of line, if you get out of these lines, then I'm going to make you pay kind of thing. And I'm just going to be horrendous.
Wow.
Yeah. And just, and again, it's just the irony in all of it, as I look back on everything, is that first of all, was working against myself because what I was hoping to accomplish was actually, it was going the opposite direction.
Causing it to
Well, it was
happen.
causing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, also just the fact that, I mean, all these things that I wish had not been in my life, that caused me to get to where I was.
Yeah.
I was then now I'm the one putting that on someone else and other people. So it's crazy how those things work.
Yeah, so I think in other conversations we've had, it's kind of this idea of you've got walls up, but you've also got knives out. You're protecting what's inside, but you also are attacking so that you can protect and control the events of your life.
Yes, it was a false security.
Yeah, yeah. So during all this time, you're a believer because you come to Christ at an early age, right?
About
Young
11
teen?
years old.
Yeah. And you're in church some of that time. But as you're walking through all of this now and it's starting to play out, you talked about how that begins to affect your view of faith and church especially. So you eventually make a decision about that. Talk about that moment where you say, I'm walking away from all this stuff.
Well, I think it's important to say that, yes, I did become a Christian at 11. I was involved in a church with my mother back. I grew up in Lancaster, and we went to church and all those and started sharing that together, my mother and I, and then eventually a sister and her husband started coming, and the church that I went to was a Southern Baptist church, very legalistic,
Okay.
very, very legalistic in
Yep.
the way of like it's performance based, and if you don't do this, or if you do this,
Right.
God's hammering down on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was just that also just kind of inside of me just bred these feelings of just kind of bucking
Yep.
authority,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of like it was harsh environment,
Yeah.
very and just fighting constantly in the church among the staff and the
Wow.
pastor, and it was insanity.
Wow.
So then there was a time of transition that Wayne and Carol Hamilton came
Yeah.
to that church because they were interim youth minister because the other
Okay.
one had just up and quit.
Okay.
And then they, through knowing them and then them taking us to Ovilla Road, I started going, us meaning the youth group there, I started going and attending Ovilla Road, which is
Yeah.
where I met you.
Yeah.
And then of course that was just a breath of fresh air for me. I mean, Brother Nick's teaching and just so much that was just so different about that whole environment.
Right.
But then even through the process of a lot of things going on there was another evolving into even more of a greater taking away from the whole legalistic aspect of things into God's grace,
Right.
and that sort of thing. But to get to so we were in church, and at this point, by the way, I've got a family. I mean, we
Yeah.
have children.
Right.
We're living back here, and I just really enjoyed the transition of all these different phases that we went through with churches. But
Right.
here's a problem. The problem started where it was because of all of these things that were ingrained in me from a young child through my experiences at home and then also my experiences in church,
Right.
kind of led me to still have this performance-oriented relationship towards God and with God.
Yeah.
And so, at the time when I'm raising my children, this is mid-90s. This is when, and I'm not saying in every church, but
Yep.
particularly where I was and
Yep.
the people that were in my social circle, there was just a lot of ideas that weren't bad ideas. It was wonderful.
Right.
But it wasn't anything that I was, feeling in tune with. It was very foreign to me based on the
Right.
way that I grew up. And so there was just a lot of pressure to be away or say the right things or do
Yeah.
the right things all the time that
Yeah.
just eventually led me into, I can't do this. I don't want to do this.
Yes.
Throw my hands up and walk away,
Yeah.
which ultimately meant me,
Yeah.
our family, not even really attending church anymore.
Wow. So
Yeah.
the pressure inside, and then the walls
Yeah.
up, and
Yeah.
the feeling of I can't measure up, and I'm going to control the situation. I don't like what this is, so I'm kind of done. I'm walking away.
Yeah,
Is where you get.
It was too much. It felt too much for me at the time to
Yeah.
keep up this appearance, to do all these things. And I think this will lead us into the next is
Yeah.
that towards that time frame of before I said I'm done.
Yeah.
Was that fact that I had we started to socially drink, and that's a big part of it, because that's when, at least for me, the Bible says that everything's permissible, not everything is beneficial.
Right.
And so this is not a speech about alcohol in general and
Right.
for all people. I'm telling my personal story, which
Yep.
is that me allowing even social drinking, it escalated into more and more and more exceptions to the rule and boundaries crossed and different things like that.
Right.
While I was still in church and doing all these things, I started those habits that made me feel more and more withdrawn. And then that was when the cutoff happened,
Wow.
through that process.
Yeah. So you begin to kind of pursue a social life then that has alcohol
Yes.
involved in it. Both of you do. It's part of where you go.
Yeah.
Is there relief down this path for you?
A false
Yeah, that's right.
sense of relief. I mean,
Right.
I know that now. But then, yes,
Yeah.
it felt
It
very
felt like,
freeing to just not think or worry about all the pressures of holding up this, facade, I guess,
Right.
of who I should be, who people thought I should have been, etc. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is all bringing us to a place where God is arranging events and circumstances. Now comes the diagnosis of cancer, and you choose this treatment plan. And it's going to take you to this place where God is going to really bring you to where you have no control. It's ultimately
Yes.
where we're headed.
Yeah.
And it's going to bring you to a place of great difficulty, again, as most treatment plans for cancer do. So that we all understand this process, give us an overview of what that's like, because it's going to affect you physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. God's going to use it for good here,
Yes.
but it's going to bring you to a place of the end of yourself, the end of controlling everything, running life on your own. So talk about what this treatment plan is like and how it prepares you for this new thing that God does.
Yeah. So, like I've already said, we left for Mesa, Arizona on February 27th of that year of 22. Okay. So we get there, and, again, this whole time we're traveling, and even the weeks kind of leading up to us leaving, God's starting to work on my spirit. Like he's really starting to, I started listening to worship music. I needed this sense of peace in my life. And it was like, that's where, like, I knew
Right.
where to draw that from.
Yeah.
Like, I'd been in church. I knew
Yeah.
where to get that sense of peace and comfort. And so I started to listen to worship music that led me into opening my Bible and starting to read again on a daily basis, and praying and asking God for, direction and peace and all these different things. And so leading up to us, the first week that we were there, I was encouraged by a friend to start journaling my thoughts down and all that, because it was just, she's like, that's going to help you a lot to get those, even write your prayers out.
Wow.
Like, if it's too difficult for you to express, like, first of
Yeah.
all, God knows what you need before you say it. But
Right.
so we got through the first week, and it was more of an orientation type of style. But, even that was just absolutely just horrible, because
Yeah.
you're getting PET scans and you're waiting for, the results from that. So you're just boggled up inside and just a tight knot of like, okay, has it spread?
Yeah.
You're finding out more information about
Right.
what's actually going on inside. And then, you have a port put in, and, it was just such an excruciating
And you're
time.
away from home.
And I'm away from home. I'm away
Yeah.
from my kids. And I'm thinking to myself, this first week has just crawled by. I still have 6 more weeks of this. And by the way, I thought that it was just going to be 6 weeks. I thought the first day of treatment, or the first day there, was like my first day of treatment.
Right.
No.
Wow.
They then informed me, no, this is 7 weeks that you're going to be here. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So that just added to it, like,
Yep.
And so, because the first few weeks there, a week felt like a month. And so, I'm going through all these emotions of, okay, I cannot believe this. Like, it's only been 3 days, and I'm just missing home. I'm missing my family. Like, I'm just going through all of that. So then they start the treatments, and, so just to kind of explain, I'm going through this treatment plan where they treat you primarily with food. Okay. So I'm eating about 800 to 1,000 calories a day of raw food.
Wow.
I had kind of started that process anyway before I left because I found out what their protocol was. So I was trying to do my best to kind of work myself up to that.
Right.
But this was like this was like a whole nother level of being hungry kind of thing.
Right.
And so, there's a calorie deficiency going on there where I'm hungry. You're detoxing, you've got headaches, and that in itself can cause you to be more vulnerable in your emotions, missing home.
Yep.
And then I start the harder treatments. Well, the treatment started to affect me more the longer the time went on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
And then you go through part of the treatment process that is every week. It's the most difficult of it. Talk about that for just a moment.
The most difficult one. So it was. So it's a treatment called hyperthermia.
Okay.
Hyperthermia is heat.
Okay.
They explained to me that this particular treatment, it was the most crucial against cancer because it reaches cancer stem cells. But the process, they're telling me all the good stuff, and I'm like, yeah, throw the kitchen sink at it. But then, they're saying, okay, so what we're going to do is, you're put in this chamber, arms, you're in it, your head's the only thing out of the chamber. And so you're laying there and it's kind of over you. And that, the goal is to get your internal body temperature to 105 degrees.
Wow.
But the problem is you're in there for 6 hours. Ooh. Now, your internal temperature is not 105 degrees for 6 hours,
right.
But what they do is they heavily sedate you as much as possible to keep you as comfortable as possible. Mm-hmm. And then they heat you up for 2 hours. And then once you reach that internal temperature that they want,
right.
They keep you there for 2 hours at that temperature, and then they have to cool the body down. So there's another 2 hours where they have to get your body temperature back down to a safe temperature to be able to release you from the chamber, because lots of different things could happen that wouldn't be good.
Yeah.
So that was just the worst.
I think about times I've been sick and had fever, not ever 105, but when I've had fever, it's a miserable feeling. Yeah. And I can't imagine being at 105 and then going through that process. I guess you're feeling sick through that whole thing.
Well, so the first 2 hours, it's kind of like you are comfortable enough to be in kind of a twilight, where you're sedated, where you're comfortable, you're able to sleep and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the closer your internal temperature is getting to 105, you're not necessarily sick as much as panic sets in. You wake up and you can't move, you can't get out of this situation, and you are claustrophobic. You wake up in a panic of like, I can't breathe. Because it's just so hot, and so it just would take your breath away. And so then you're trying to fight to get out, but of course they have people there monitoring you and everything, and they're praying with you. They're trying to talk you down, back to like, remember your why, and you're praying with us and all that kind of thing. And so it was by far the hardest thing that I did treatment wise when I was there.
This happens once every week,
correct?
Right?
Yes.
How in the world does someone who's trying to control and not like to be out of control, how do you deal with that?
That was one of the things that God used, amongst many other things, where, so I wanted the cancer gone. I wanted to be healthy. I wanted to come home, be with my children, move on with life. And so that is where I started releasing. Now, not fully.
Yeah, sure.
But little bits at a time. I was going to God. I was just praying and saying, God, this is so hard. This is so hard for me. I don't want to give up on this. I don't want to, because they can't force you to do those things. I mean, if you told them you weren't going to, then they say, okay, let's move on to the next thing.
Right.
But I was like, God, I want to go home. I want to see my family. I want to be done with this. Please give me the strength. Not ever saying this is out of my control, but just, God, give me the strength. Give me the resolve. Give me what I need to be able to get through this, you know. And, you know, I had James having people back here praying for me on those particular days.
Yeah.
And so, you know, which that treatment made every other treatment that I was going through, which the other ones did make me very sick, nauseous, throwing up, no appetite, all that kind of stuff. And so, you know, but that one, that was, easy compared to this particular
part.
treatment. Yeah.
So James, what's it like? You're there, you're not here at home, you're out there with her, and you're watching, because you can't even be there for all of those treatments, at least in the room.
Right.
What is it like knowing she's going through that and watching her as she comes back to you each day, seeing her walking through so much struggle and stress?
Excruciating, because you felt, you know, powerless. You can't help. You can't, you know, the only thing you can do in that situation is be quiet, listen, try to understand, and be supportive, which was a little bit easier for me, honestly, because of the courage and strength that Mary showed up with. The determination was quite impressive. And so I just kind of sat back and clearly knew God was leading somewhere. I didn't know that it was going to be the result that it was in complete spiritual and physical healing.
Yeah.
But I had assumed so, but you just don't know.
Yeah.
There's kind of the fear of the Lord there where you're just kind of like, I don't know where you're going with this and what it means for me and for Mary and our family. So it was very, very difficult to watch on those particular days, which was every Thursday. I had to have her at the clinic by 7 and then pick her up at 4. And I knew what they were doing, and just the thought of it was crazy. As a matter of fact, no one else in the clinic could do it.
Wow.
They would all try it and say, nope, I can't do it.
Wow.
There was one other man who was there, an engineering genius actually, and he was the only one in the clinic that would do it. Mary was the only other one, and that's how difficult it was.
Yeah. So are you getting like text updates during the day, or do you have?
I actually am. The nurse that oversaw Mary through the hyperthermia treatment was incredible, just absolutely fantastic. Very, it just fit the description of the nurse. If you had to have a nurse, this is the one you wanted to have.
Yeah, sure.
And she would send me updates. She's doing great, you know, or sometimes, well, we had a little issue. She, you know, she was woke up in a little bit of a panic, you know, but everything's fine. We got her redetermined. And so, you know, when I would pick her up, she would be covered in, she would look like somebody just, like she just got out of the shower. Just, you know, they would make her also wear, not just being in the infrared chamber, but they would also make her wear wool socks, wool gloves, and sweats inside there. So she came out just drenched with sweat, and they would have to wheelchair her out because of the sedation and help her into the vehicle, and then I'd have to get her home and try to feed her, and she'd be stone cold asleep by 7:00 p.m.
Wow.
So, it was hard, man. It was we were very determined to beat this, very determined to listen and follow to God's leading and direction. But our focus was totally physical.
Yeah.
Physical healing,
Yeah.
you know, obedience, faith, physical healing.
Yeah.
That's where we were headed,
Right.
in our minds.
And I think he got to those way faster than I did.
Yeah.
The first two.
Yeah.
I was at first focused on the physical healing.
Right.
Like I had not gotten to that point yet where the reality of the situation was that God allowed this particular situation in my life
Okay.
to heal me,
Yep.
not from the physical cancer,
Right.
but he used that situation
Yep.
to heal me spiritually, to in the areas that
Wow.
that I needed spiritual healing. And I, he got to these conclusions, I feel like, not necessarily maybe for me personally, but
Right.
for himself
Right.
and kind of the direction of where everything was going. He came to these conclusions much quicker than I did, I think.
Wow.
But he didn't share these things with me. He was very quiet through this whole process of just allowing me to deal with those things. And again, hindsight, I know that God kept him silent because God needed me to only hear his voice.
Yeah.
And so it was just everything happening between the two of us,
Yeah.
on an individual basis, and then between us, relationally. Man, was just
Wow.
really cool to.
So you described in your story that you reached this point in the treatment process later into it where there's a morning where God meets with you, and there becomes this moment of surrender. And it from the way you described it, it's in this moment that every hurt from the past, the trauma, all the wanting to control and protect, all the walls up, knives out, that and God's grace all comes together this one morning for you.
Yeah.
Talk about that morning, what that was like.
Okay. Excuse me. Yeah. So, through the process of this time that I'm there, I start thinking about things actually that had happened to me along the path of my life. And I remember having a woe is me moment where, and I even actually said this to him. I said it actually before we left for treatment. And then in the middle of treatment, I did not say it to him. I was just thinking it like, okay, God, I'm miserable. Like, haven't I been through enough?
Wow.
I'm done dealing with this. I want to go home. Like it was a moment of like, haven't I been through enough? Hasn't there been enough tragedy? Hasn't there been enough heartache? Hasn't there been enough?
Wow.
All the things.
Yep.
And so, I'm going through these motions back and forth where it's like, praying to God, relying on God, feeling this definite pull
Yep.
and release,
Yeah.
actually.
Wow.
But I'm going back and forth in my mind.
Yeah.
Because the enemy sees where God's trying to send me here.
Yeah.
Okay. The enemy knows what
Yep.
is going on, and he's
Yep.
trying as best he can to keep me focused on the negative and not what God's trying to do in my life. And so there was this one morning. So, all this is going on in the background. Okay. And so I had just come to the end of myself, but this was the morning of a hyperthermia
Oh, wow.
morning.
Yeah.
So I would get up super early, and I would have I had a devotional book that my sister-in-law gave me, and I was so thankful for that. And
Shout out to Jenny Lynch.
yes.
Yeah. All right.
And so I'm reading that every morning, and God is just really, just softening my heart and just giving me so much comfort and peace. And it was like every single devotion, every single day was exactly what I needed to hear.
Wow.
Before, sometimes I even knew I needed to hear it. Like it was something that would happen later on that day that I would look back and go, oh my goodness.
Wow.
I read that in the devotional this
Yeah.
morning, and that was the scripture I read. So anyway,
Wow.
this particular morning, I'm sitting there and I'm just done. And I had just had a conversation with him a few days earlier. Like, I'm done. I want to go home, pull out.
Wow.
We're just, what?
Yep.
We'll figure something else out.
Yep.
And so the Bible verse on my devotion that morning was something that, as Christians, as people who have been in church most of their lives or even all their lives, they've heard this verse before. I mean, it's on every, plaque at Hobby Lobby.
Right. Right.
Be still and know that I am God.
Yeah.
But in this devotion, it was talking about letting go of control, letting go of the fight, letting
Wow.
go of all these things because of how little we actually control. And so the way that verse was translated that I had never really heard before or contemplated was stop fighting and know that I am God. And so right then, just all of this turmoil that over the several weeks before, that I'm like, all these memories coming to my head, all of this disappointment, all of this hurt, all of this, feelings of abandonment and neglect, and just all of this that had just got itself a nice pretty ball, a gift with a bow on it that the enemy kept trying to hand to me every time I would try to make progress in some area of my life.
Right.
That would make me revert back.
Yeah.
All of that just came to a head for me that morning. Stop fighting, Mary. It was like God was saying right then, that word out of every other page in that book, that was the thing that he wanted me to see.
Wow.
Stop fighting. Depend on me. Keep your eyes on me. I love you. I have your best interest at heart. All of these other things and all of these other people who have disappointed you, that's not who I am. I got down on my knees on the floor beside my bed and cried out to God and said, I'm done fighting. And every bit of my life that I've tried to control up to this point has led to destruction. And it has been a lie from the enemy. That my control over things that have hurt me has actually made me the person that I never wanted to be. The person in doing things and saying things that I always said that I wouldn't do. It caused so much bitterness and anger in me and so much upheaval that I started to do the exact things that I said that I would never be. And I'm done with that.
Yeah.
And you have led me through the fire and walked with me through this whole thing. And you have been faithful. I just started, and so when I released that, I just remember I was able to start just praising God for all of the things that he just brought to my mind of, like, every step of the way of all these different things that he had brought me through that I wasn't even realizing at the time. And we just don't have enough time for this on this podcast to go into every single aspect of it.
Yeah.
But he started bringing these memories to me of all the ways that he had provided, all of the mountains that he had crumbled. I mean, just amazing things. And that right there, that for me, that solidification of God's faithfulness in my life, regardless of all the ridiculous, mind-blowing, hideous things that I had done along the way, and disobedience, walking out of his will for my life, he still showed himself faithful, loving, and true. And that his deepest desire is that those that have been called, the ones who claim him as Savior, are always called back into the fold.
Yeah. Good.
And that he rejoices over that when he is able to use a circumstance in your life that looks horrific and awful, and some people would maybe say the worst case scenario possible, and turn that for good.
So I'm just curious, did you realize before that that's what you were doing? Did you have this conscious thought of, I'm fighting, I'm walls up, I'm knives out? Were you aware that was happening, or is that all of a sudden what came clear that morning to you? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a small aspect to the fact that, yes, I knew that I was tired and fighting.
Yeah.
But that moment in time that I'm just mentioned, I think that this epiphany, like it all came.
That's what I was kind of
like it was
heading toward.
100% clarity at that time.
Yes.
I never really gave it much thought before.
Right.
Yeah. So at that point, yeah, it was just 100% clarity of like everything. It was like God just opened up every aspect, every sense, so to speak.
Yeah.
All my senses were just very in tune
Yep.
with
Yep.
all of these circumstances along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this past Sunday at church, Lisa Mawini talked about a painful time in her life when she was a young child. And she said here as an adult, she all of a sudden recognized I'd never grieved over that area. And she said she allowed Jesus to heal that little girl. Is that kind of what you're talking about as well, that all these experiences from the past all came rushing forward like a photo album you open up, I'm assuming.
Yes.
And that Jesus meets you in every one of those scenarios where you felt abandoned or hurt, and he meets you there. Is that kind of what you're describing?
Yeah, and yes. And I don't remember where we actually heard this, talked about it or anything like that, but when you invite Jesus into those painful situations in your life where you're wounded, where you're seeking, approval or, whatever whatever you're needing at that moment, comfort, whatever, when you ask Jesus to go into those moments with you, it changes everything because he heals those things individually. You can look at your circumstances in your life and put it in a big ball of just, these circumstances that have just turned into this snowball. But you've got to deal with the grief on individual levels.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I absolutely believe that Jesus, bringing him into that, seeing his kindness and compassion towards me in what I was going through, and just the everything that I felt from him, just literally just beside me, I could feel his presence so deeply, especially on that morning.
Yeah.
And from that point forward, actually.
Wow.
Just so much peace, so much comfort. So yes, when you invite Jesus into those places, you just feel you feel the healing, you feel the peace.
So you get up from the floor that day and walk out of that room different, right? What's different for you as you walk out?
Man, I just felt joy. I felt joy in my heart. And
even
not
though it's
surface.
a hyperthermia day, you're about to go into treatment.
Yes. But I felt joy that was beyond the surface. You can have a child and feel joy. You can have a moment of, just whatever the thing that makes you happy at the moment. You can feel that joy. But there's a difference between surface joy.
Yeah.
And why? Because that joy runs out.
Yeah.
But I felt joy deep in my heart, and my soul felt settled. My spirit felt free and light.
Wow.
And it was like, and I hate to, be cliche-ish, but it was like I literally had bricks on my shoulders that I just felt free. I felt that weight off of me. The fighting that I felt like I had to do, I now said, it was just this, it was so clear to me, like, God's got this.
Wow.
He's going to walk me through this regardless. Because, see, remember at the time, I did not know about what the process, I didn't know about what my healing, physical healing ultimately was going to end up being.
Right.
But at that moment, I said, I trust you, God. And regardless of what the outcome of this physical ailment is, I trust you. I know that you love me. I know that you have my best interest at heart.
Wow.
And I know and can feel what you're doing in my life.
Whew.
Yeah.
So, James, do you see a difference when she walks out of the room that day?
Oh, yeah, unrecognizable. Well, let me walk that back. She was absolutely, completely different. We'd been married for 28 years at that point and had been through a lot together. And the lightness, the freedom was all over her. And I completely anticipated her to come drudging out of that
Yeah.
room and get into hyperthermia, be
Right.
worried and scared and all of that, but still determined just to get through that, because she's never been one to really back down from a fear. But she came out ready to go, and just totally different. It really took me back, but I knew something special had happened.
Yeah.
But I couldn't really ask, because that was kind of, I just knew it was between her and God. I knew God was working, but I was kind of in the dark, and just kind of in an area of faith that
Yeah.
everything would work out, that it would be accepted, and he would be successful in breaking through to her. And when she came out, I knew that he had.
Wow.
I didn't know what had happened.
Didn't know the depth
Didn't
of
know
it.
the story behind it.
Right.
But she came out completely different and really took me by surprise.
Huh.
In a good way.
Yeah, and it shows up as she's going throughout her days. You walk in the treatment center.
She walks into the treatment center, and she just starts having this very direct interest in others there, and talking with them. And there's some new people that have come in. One particular woman comes to mind who is really struggling, because she was there and her children were in their early teens, 11, 12, 13. And she was just beside herself with misery, having had to leave them. Her husband couldn't stay with her. He had to go back and work. So she was there by herself, and Mary was instrumental in ministering to her and helping her remember why she was there for those children, for her husband. And it was amazing just to sit back and watch that
Wow.
unfold, and just beautiful, really beautiful. And talking with others and ministering to others. She became a light in the clinic.
That's awesome.
And I wanted to say too that, I've said this before in the testimony, and I won't repeat all of it, but it was very clear to me not too long after that so all these things are coming to the surface of like understanding. And I said before that God kept him quiet. And what I mean by that is just allowing for God to work in my life.
Yeah.
So obviously he needed to, and I wanted him to be there with me through the treatment. That would have been excruciatingly lonely. But, I know now, and I knew just within a few weeks after that point, that this is the reason that God sent me here.
Wow.
To just, I knew no one there. I mean, it's just me and James.
Right.
I got to know people as the weeks went along, but otherwise it was just him and I and God. And God used all of that time to soften my heart, to minister to me, to help me to understand his love, his just great love for all of us, for me. And so with him being silenced, and then being away from everyone and everything that I was comfortable with, that I would have any distractions, that now I know, of course, is the purpose of why these other places in the Metroplex weren't giving me any peace, and nothing was really working out where going to those places would work out. Because God knows he gave me my personality. He knows me, and he knows every fiber of my being, and he knows what was gonna get to me and what wasn't. And so, yeah.
So you mentioned this idea, that's a truth from Scripture, that what the enemy even may mean for evil, God uses for good. And we know that comes from the story of Joseph, where his brothers meant evil against him. But at the end of the story, he has the faith to say, what you meant for evil against me, God meant for good. So here you have all this struggle with cancer and the treatment plan. But from what I'm hearing you say, God is using this, or has used this now, to actually do a greater work, that what might have been intended for evil has now been used for good. How has that played out now in your life? What is different now about your life as a result of that? What's good today?
Well, I'm going to say that the biggest thing, well, first of all, the peace, and people can overuse these words, but true peace and just feeling, again, lighthearted, peaceful, confident, confident in God, confident in who I am, how he sees me.
Nice.
Confident that all of those things that the enemy was trying to use for evil, that, see, because God's waiting for us to say, okay, God, he knows these things have happened. I mean, there's sin in the world. There's things that are going to happen that are just going to really stink to each of us individually, based on our own actions or someone else's actions towards us. But when we have the proper perspective and we are, and when we allow God to heal those areas of our lives and not let the enemy play his games and follow through with his schemes and all the things that he tries to lie to us about, if we allow God, because I did that, and obviously, and so when we allow God, though, to come into those areas of our life, all things work out for good. Because there's not a place, listen, when Jesus gets into the situation, everything changes. And there is nothing that's not good about him. So if we allow God into our circumstances, I heard someone say once, it's a lot better for you to, instead of praying your circumstances into God, have God prayed into your circumstances, because a lot of times we will do the opposite of that thing. We're like, okay, God, here's this. Okay, no. Lord, can you please do something through this situation, because it's very painful. It's hurtful. It's doing all these things inside of me. So I invite you in. But yes, so back to the, God absolutely used everything that the enemy in my life, from the time I was a little girl, planting those seeds inside of me through all the experiences that I had. And in this moment, all of that rushing into this one moment in time, God made all of that work out for my good, because it brought me closer to him.
That's so good. And you've also talked about, now you are much more aware of even the enemy's lies. And knowing how to resist and shut those down. Talk about for just a moment of, what is your thought process now when difficulty happens? Because this doesn't mean all of a sudden that life is flawless and perfect.
No, it doesn't.
But where do you turn now to understand, counsel yourself even about life?
And through this year and a half process where I was at treatment, and then when we got home, we didn't immediately get back in the church. It wasn't until May of this year that we started going to vertical. And that wasn't even a decision, honestly, where we said we need to get back into church now. And then we started going to vertical. It was actually because his dad had that ceremony there. And then the next weekend was Mother's Day. Now, I wasn't against going to church at all, but I know again now that God had, got me home from treatment with a clear report, and I was celebrating with my family. And so he still, though, through this process, he is that year and a half, I guess really year, that he was still working with me. He was still molding me into who I needed to be to get to where I am right now. Literally, literally the podcast, the testimony, all the things. Because I had organically talked to people about my experience, not only the physical aspects of it, but also the spiritual aspects of it over this last year and a half. But he was just preparing me along the way. So to answer your question, and because all that was important to say, he was teaching me through resources, through his word, through even prayer at times, epiphanies that would come to me, to when Satan comes to me, when the enemy attacks me with all the things that he's always tried to manipulate me with, the difference in me now is that I immediately go to God in prayer out loud.
Yeah.
I tell him he's being a bully again.
Yeah.
This is the lies that he's trying to tell me that goes directly against your word. And I'm going to start proclaiming these things out loud.
Good.
And I quote the scriptures. Now, some
Yeah.
of them I don't even know by heart yet. You should see my mirror. It looks like a big Post-it board. But let me tell you,
Yeah.
it is there to remind me who I am,
Yeah.
to remind me that the enemy will use every circumstance, every thought, every sometimes people in your life to get you back to the place that God delivered you from.
Yeah.
And this is very important. I also would like to say the main thing that I have learned through this last year and a half, and then how to deal with the enemy's attacks, is, like I said, immediately I go into prayer. I start quoting scriptures, promises that God has made over my life. But here's the thing. I say to myself, do not take counsel
There you go.
with your emotions
Yes.
as to whether or not a promise of God is true. Because once you start, because see, in the garden, that's how it started.
Yeah.
Adam and Eve didn't go murder somebody. They didn't lie. They didn't do this or
Yeah.
what. How did Satan get them to disobey?
Yeah.
He had them questioning whether God's word was true or not.
Yeah.
And that is true in every level of life. It's like I've said before. The enemy is not coming to you with a pitchfork and horns and looking real ugly and grotesque from the beginning. The beginning looks real nice and pretty and enticing. And I don't just mean sin. I mean even the way that you think about yourself and you think about life and you think about the way God thinks about you.
Right.
He's going to have you questioning God's promises over you. So the way that I have combated that now, what's different is that I immediately go to God about it, and I tell the enemy he can go back where he came from.
Yeah, there you go. I love that picture. I don't take counsel with my emotions over a promise. That's just kind of need to pause on that for just a moment. Think about that, because it's so natural, like you said, like we all do. I think is okay. We see a promise, read a promise, or hear a promise from Scripture, and we immediately start a little conversation.
Yeah.
And if we start it with our own natural emotions, we say things like, "Does that seem right? Does that feel right? How would that? How would I do that?" And then you start having that counsel. You're not going to end up with faith at the end of it.
Right. And, and I think that applies to so many things. Like, for instance, like forgiving someone. Forgiving cannot be done on an emotion, because our emotions will fail us every single time. We have to make a decision.
Yes.
I am forgiving this person because X, Y, and Z, whatever, I choose to forgive.
Yep.
I choose to believe what God said about me because his word is true. So when you take counsel with your emotions about whether or not what the Bible says about you is true, well, that's dangerous.
It is.
Because our emotions fluctuate all the time from day to day in whatever circumstance we're in, whatever has happened to us that morning, how our kids are acting, how our husband's acting.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, or possibly past mistakes that you've made in your life.
Yep.
It will fail us every time to depend on our emotions when it comes to forgiveness and when it comes to God's promises. If God said it, it is true, and you have to literally brainwash yourself. I shouldn't use that word, but you have to just repeat that to yourself all the time.
Yeah, renew your mind.
Renew your mind, exactly. That's a better word.
So, no, it's true though, because we have to take counsel with our faith and with truth, and not just with our emotions. Let them catch up, do their own thing when they get there, but we can't take counsel from them.
No, absolutely not.
Wow,
it's
that's so
failure.
good. And I'm sure now, looking back at your life, you see that's what I did.
Oh my goodness.
That's what I did when I was hurt and I was rejected, when I went through this trauma. That's what you did. But now you've got this shift, radical shift that's happened, and it started because of that moment of healing that God brought you through by bringing you to the end of yourself. It's a beautiful story. James, so Is she different today?
Yeah, you could say that. One very easily recognizable attribute in our home is that wasn't necessarily there before, at least not to the level it is now, is gratitude. Just recognizing God in everything. Trust and faith that, now that we've actually walked through and faced, what the enemy meant for evil, God meant for good. It's just second nature to us now, or actually first nature, to just have gratitude in everything.
Wow.
And again, that's freedom and a very light yoke.
Yeah.
And it's filled with joy,
Yeah.
It's so much different. And it's been a ride.
Yeah.
I've been a passenger, but I've had a lot that has been dealt with spiritually in me as well. So, I wouldn't trade any experience that we've been through together for where we are now.
Yeah. So it's affected your relationship?
Oh, my goodness,
how you
absolutely.
talk together?
Yeah. Yeah. So what's, you hear it said many ways, many times, but once the intimacy in a relationship goes vertical between both spouses, the intimacy in the relationship with your spouse is just, it's a dream. That's what every spouse dreams of, the relationship they want to have with their significant other and with their wife, their husband. If you are not focused vertically first, then you're just spitting in the wind.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you both for telling your story. I hurt for all you've walked through, but I'm grateful for what God has done in healing and restoring.
Absolutely.
And
Thank you.
restoring what the years of the locust have taken to a place of greater beauty than you would have ever even imagined.
Yes.
True.
So,
And it's not done. I know it's not
Yeah,
over.
it's
Exactly.
the exciting part.
It's the exciting part is that I can't wait to see what else God is going to restore.
yeah, exactly. Love that. Well, thank you again, and I hope for everyone who is watching, listening, it's been helpful for you. Come join us at Vertical. You can meet these two fine folks, and see what else God is doing here in our presence, and we're seeing others healed and changed and their lives transformed. So we will keep lifting them up and living them out.